You're watching Force 13's live streaming service. This is Force 13 Live. We are tracking, once again, Hurricane Dorian for another night here at Force 13 HQ. We're giving it a wind estimate of 90 miles per hour, which is slightly higher than the National Hurricane Center's advisory that's just come out. They're still going with 85, a pressure of 986 millibars. Not too much difference between the two, and that's not really a significant point at this juncture. But there is Dorian on the screen in front of us right now, and the threat to the northernmost Bahamas and to Florida is increasing. Never before have the models been so sure of a Florida landfall on the east coast so far out. Comparing with other storms that made landfall on the east coast, such as Jean, Andrew, indeed, and Irma. The models are more confident with this one than they have been with any of those other ones, which really tells you something at 4 days out. My name's Nathan Foy. I'm joined by the team in this hour, consisting of Euxinator, David, Ethan, Orlando, Dimitri, and Mike. Good evening to you all.
Good evening.
Good evening.
Good evening.
Another packed show tonight with a lot of people and opinions, I'm sure. Not too much has changed with the storm today. Here is some latest rapid scan imagery of Dorian on the visible there. The eye is still not really visible. Recon have been in and out of the storm, still finding very similar intensities than what they were getting yesterday. Who would like to kick us off in what they think of the storm tonight? They're a bit shy tonight.
Well, I guess I'll go ahead.
Let's talk to Ethan. Go ahead.
Well, I guess that I can read off the National Hurricane Center's newest forecast as I loaded it up here. But they are forecasting still a 130 mile per hour peak, which would make it a minimal, keyword minimal, Category 4 hurricane. That doesn't mean that it could be stronger. It means that that's what they're forecasting right now, and it could be weaker at landfall. We don't know, and that's the that's the biggest uncertainty with this storm. Now, in 12 hours, they are forecasting the storm to have 105 miles per hour winds, 115 and 24, 120 and 36, 125 and 48, and both 72 and 96 hours have winds of 130 miles per hour, with the 96 hour being very close to land. And then the 128 mile per hour, not miles per hour, 120 hour point is located inland just near, that would be just near Orlando, and that has forecasted winds of 75 miles per hour.
Lots of graphics being thrown at you right now on the screen. They'll be going through all the way through our show tonight on the left-hand side right now. I quite like that graphic showing the storm force winds in the next 5 days. Well into the 80 to 90% range for parts of central Florida. In Orlando as well, the chances in the mid-70s, along the coast into the 80s now nearby. So the chance is really rising there, and we're still quite a way out in terms of forecasting the thing. How long? About 4 days until it reaches land. What I've noticed in the latest National Hurricane Center advisory, which will appear on your screen in just a moment, is how on the late part of the forecast track, it's now taking it, you can see a bit more of a curve towards the north after the landfall. But what's more is that it slows the storm down as well. Now that could be uncertainty, but it could also actually be that the storm slows down and maybe even stalls over the area, and that would be pretty bad. Already, even if the storm moved through at a decent pace, we could be looking at 20 inches of rain for parts of the eastern coast of Florida. At the minute, that would be areas in and around and just south of Cape Canaveral, if this track was to verify. But cones exist for a reason, and the storm could still venture anywhere within that cone. That's pretty much from Key Largo all the way up to the coast of Georgia, and maybe even off the shore, but I don't think so, because pretty much every single model is on board with a Florida landfall. I don't think there are any now that aren't. Does anyone know?
No, I don't know of anyone.
No. I'm not sure.
Not from what we've seen. So again, we're looking at a lot of M's on the screen now. I'm right in saying, aren't I, that the National Hurricane Center are now expecting it to become a major hurricane much sooner?
Yes.
I believe so.
Yes.
2 p.m. Friday now. That's less than 24 hours away for it to go up 2 categories, which is maybe slightly bullish from the National Hurricane Center. They must be confident that it will intensify markedly as soon as as soon as the storm sorts that eye out. What's been happening with the eye structure today? Who's been watching closely?
I've been keeping an eye on it. And the eye, it looks like it's honestly, it's staying together. And honestly, it doesn't look, like it's not complete or anything like that. But like, it definitely looks like it's getting stronger.
Part of the reasoning that we went with 90 miles per hour on our current intensity right now is that earlier we had some real-time ATCF data saying 78 knots, which is just a few miles an hour off the 90 mile an hour. But also we've had SATID estimates today of around 89 miles per hour. But 85 National Hurricane Center says we're going with 90. Not too much difference between the two, but it would appear that at any time, a new intensification phase might begin. A slight blow up there on the south side of the eye wall on the visible imagery, but not too much changing with the storm right now. And you've still, on the right hand side of it, still got that area that's devoid of clouds, and whether that might still be dry air that is still intruding.
Well, I have been watching the. Go ahead.
Go ahead, Beefy. You're fine.
Okay, thank you. I have been watching dry air imagery throughout the day today, and that does look to be still some dry air intrusion. But
yes,
it has been disappearing, I want to say, throughout the day, though.
Right now, the storm is currently heading into less favorable wind shear. It's not enough to have a negative effect on the storm. However, it's not as conducive as it was 24 hours ago, which is why we may not see a rapid intensification like we were expecting yesterday.
I'm not so sure about that, because I think the improving picture with the dry air situation will more than offset the increasing wind shear. It is only a slight increase, and we've seen it before. Storms that have dealt with 10 to 20 knots of wind shear, like Dorian will be over the next 48 hours, have still managed to do extremely well. There's the latest National Hurricane Center wind field graphic as well. So I think now the 90% zone is just about to reach the coast of Florida there. Over the next 5 days, that is the chance of tropical storm force winds. And I heard that maybe tonight they're going to start issuing hurricane watches, or tomorrow morning.
Tonight or tomorrow, Nathan?
And that's in the Bahamas, I assume. Well, here we are. I think it's on this, isn't it, David? The key messages. The risk of life-threatening storm surge and hurricane-force winds this weekend continues to increase in the northwestern Bahamas, and hurricane watches could be issued there tonight or Friday. Residents should have their hurricane plan in place and listen to advice given by local emergency officials. There is an increasing likelihood of life-threatening storm surge along portions of the Florida coast East Coast late this weekend or early next week, although it's too soon to determine where the highest storm surge will occur. That is something that I'm personally quite concerned about. Residents should have their hurricane plan in place, know if they are in a hurricane evacuation zone, and listen to advice given by local emergency officials. It's starting to get real. The risk of devastating hurricane-force winds along the Florida East Coast and the peninsula late this weekend and early next week continues to increase as well, although again it is too soon to determine where the strongest winds will occur. And regardless of the exact track of Dorian, heavy rains are expected to occur over portions of the Bahamas, Florida, and elsewhere in the southeastern United States this weekend into the middle of next week. Pretty much the whole of Florida is guaranteed 2 inches of rain from the storm. But again, if you're near the center, and it is going to be quite a compact center as it has been the whole time, then that rises steeply up to in excess of 12 inches.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, right now in the latest frames, I'm seeing small convection burst near the center right now, which indeed is indicating a strengthening storm.
David's here as well tonight. You're monitoring the Facebook stream, which we're simulcasting
Yes, I
on.
am, Nathan. It's good to be here. And any questions that come from Facebook will be posted in the room. And my position is people need to be prepared. Being scared, well, it doesn't really have to be that high, but it's just a matter of being prepared and monitoring what information is out there. And well, one just has to wait and see, because well, we know what cyclones, hurricanes, typhoons can do.
Yep, sure. Just a few notes here as well. Obviously, our coverage is very important to us, really, and I think it's a great thing that we do take a lot of community interaction. So you can send us a message live in the chat feature on our YouTube stream. Tag Force 13. It will light up big and bright for us if you have any comments or questions, and we can get to them as soon as we can, because I think it's better that we do things directly that way, because then we are actually addressing what you want to see and what you want to hear. And also you can interact with our community whenever we're off air on our Discord server, and there's plenty of links underneath our video if you're interested in finding out more. In the meantime, this is what Dorian is looking like right now. Most of the convection and bands are displaced to the north of the storm. The south side is the dry side, which is wrapping its way round towards the eastern side of the storm. But it is starting to look better, and maybe we are starting to see the progression of that eye once and for all. Orlando, are you there? I was just wondering. You posted an image earlier, so I just wondered what your take of that was. That's an infrared image there.
My take on it is it's definitely improving, especially since I've seen it yesterday. Beyond that, it remains to be seen as a threat, and I believe that NHC is so far making a pretty good call, because this could definitely intensify quite quickly.
So you agree with them that it could become a Category 3 by tomorrow?
Yes.
Alright, certainly not out of the realms of possibility at all. Let's stick with some of this imagery right now. The geocolor there, you can see how the storm has been progressing rather quickly, really, away from the Lesser Antilles, Puerto Rico and Hispaniola. The storm could have been affected a lot more by those islands, but really they weren't affecting the storm as much, because it missed the biggest land masses, allowing it to intensify further by this point than perhaps maybe it would have done. So we have some questions already. What are our predictions on the damage it will bring to Florida? Well, the best I can say to you right now is that it's a CDPS stage 6, which is quite severe, potentially catastrophic wherever it may make its landfall. Wherever it does make its landfall, it could be a whole variety of places at the minute. We can't yet narrow it down completely. The ECMWF in a recent run was taking it straight for Miami until the last minute when it veered off towards the north and then just carried on up the Florida coast. So a whole variety of things are still on the table. The HWRF has been calling for a strong landfall for quite some time. I can't remember exactly where though. And the GFS as well has been calling for that landfall for some time too.
The HWRF has it making landfall just south of Cape Canaveral.
Near Cape Canaveral. So again, these places have been mentioned several times, and they will continue to get mentioned a lot because the model spread is right in the middle. Cape Canaveral really in the middle of that model spread as we go into this evening. Alright, is that dry slot really going to slow it down a lot? Doesn't look like it will anymore. And people mentioning the invests in the Western Pacific as well. Yes, they do exist. There are 2 invests in the Western Pacific. 90W, which is near the international date line, and 91W, which is formed just to the east of Luzon in the Philippines. And Tropical Depression Podul is dying off now as it makes landfall in Vietnam. There it is actually on the imagery there. So we're covering quite a few bases tonight. Of course, Dorian is the main feature, and there is another image of how it's been doing there. I'm going to try and bring back some hybrid visible infrared imagery, hopefully in a few minutes' time. In the meantime, someone sent me the wind shear graphic. I don't know who sent that, but you can explain it if you like.
Yeah, yes, that was, as you can see, it's heading in the 20 knot, 25 knot, well, 25 I don't think it's going to be gone. But as you can see right now, it looks like it's heading into slightly less favorable conditions for rapid intensification due to the wind shear, but I don't think that's going to last long before heading into a much more conducive environment, which can unfortunately bring major hurricane landfall. However, I'm sorry, just a minute. I'm going to have a quick look at it.
Sure, go ahead.
Yeah, I don't really see anything. I don't really see any wind shear being an issue apart from now for a little bit of time. But apart from that, I don't see wind shear being an issue for this storm. I mean, it looks like it's unfortunately going to be a really bad scenario for Florida.
Yeah. It definitely looks to be that way, especially with like the fact that, like I said yesterday, we've been getting a lot of rain recently. Today was like the first day in a while where we did not really get any rain. So
actually, yes, the environmental safety and environmental has predicted that sinkholes will be a major threat if the storm comes through because the ground is very saturated from lots of rainfall in the past 2 months. They also predict that flooding is definitely going to be a major risk considering the fact that the ground's already very much saturated.
Mm-hmm.
We've had record historical flooding.
That doesn't sound very good.
No, it does not.
So where would you say are the most vulnerable places in Florida right now for any further rainfall? Because we're looking at places around Cape Canaveral extending inland, Melbourne,
I don't know.
Towards Orlando.
I would say, I mean, obviously Miami's always at risk for rain, but the biggest risk I do not think would be them. If anything,
I mean, I'd say the entire state itself, but if a specific area, I would say central and north central Florida are two main issues because we've had rivers in those areas, Lakeland, Tampa, Orlando, Gainesville even.
Gainesville.
We've had rivers that have overflown into neighborhoods already as we speak,
Really?
and we have a potential Category 4 or high-end Category 3 hurricane coming. That's just going to be an awful scenario for them.
Yeah.
Here it is on some infrared imagery right now. Difficult to say exactly what is happening because we've seen this so many times where the ice starts to pop out only to disappear within minutes sometimes. So it's very easy to have a knee-jerk reaction to see, oh look, the eye's clearing a little bit, which it appears to be in the last few minutes, because these are minutely images, so we're only looking at the last about 25 minutes in this picture. So we can hardly construct a trend at the minute, but it looks like it's another occasion where the eye is starting to come out a little bit more with blow-ups on the western side.
Yes, with the eye becoming more defined, which means, if I'm not mistaken, correct me if I'm wrong, which means the storm can intensify a lot more quickly.
Well, we don't really know if the eye is becoming better defined or not, because it's mostly hidden by all that cloud.
Well, yes, the cloud cover, but looks like in the last few frames that I saw on infrared, it looks like the eye is becoming slightly more better defined in the recent frames.
There it is on visible imagery, certainly starting to look a little bit better. And very interesting to look at right now. I think it does justify the 90 miles per hour that we're estimating for it right now. That's what we have given it. Let's now just get a few little things from the National Hurricane Center's discussion on the storm right now. So they're saying there's been little overall change in the structure of Dorian today. The hurricane has several well-defined bands of convection wrapping into the center and a small central dense overcast, which appears quite clear here. The small eye has not been as apparent in geostationary satellite imagery this afternoon, but the NOAA Hurricane Hunter aircraft reported concentric eye wall diameters of 4 and 22 nautical miles several hours ago. So they're still going with the satellite intensity estimate of 75 knots, and the next recon aircraft is scheduled to investigate this evening. So maybe we'll catch that if we're still on the air. Not sure how long we're going to run for tonight, but we'll keep you up to date. As soon as we know, of course, land isn't being directly impacted at this point. Dorian's moving northwestward at 11 knots. The hurricane should continue moving northwestward tonight between an upper level low just to the west of Dorian and a mid-level ridge near Bermuda. On Friday, the ridge is forecast to begin building westward to the north of the cyclone, and this pattern is expected to cause the hurricane to turn west-northwestward, and is why the curve is going to happen. And that is the main sticking point, by the way, because models are differing on how strong that's going to be, how sharply the storm will get turned. I've lost where I was there now. Something about it turning west-northwest. And then that motion will continue into the weekend, with Dorian moving near or over the northwestern Bahamas and towards the Florida Peninsula. The guidance envelope has nudged southward, this time with the ECMWF and HMON along the southern side and the GFS bracketing the northern side. There's been an increase in a long track spread or speed differences with day 5 positions along the dynamical models. So that's rather interesting how the models are now starting to diverge a little bit on exactly where the storm will be on day 5 and how fast it goes. So some models calling more for a slower moving storm, which would be a worst case scenario, because not only does it have more time to intensify, but it has more time to deliver huge amounts of rain. A faster moving storm will have less time over those hot waters, but I think whichever way you cut it, there's still a lot of time, well more than ample time, for the storm to rapidly intensify and reach the higher categories.
I'm sorry, my apologies. The storm, the HWRF model also not only has it intensifying rapidly, it also has it exploding, well not exploding, but definitely the wind field, at least, or the storm itself, massively growing in size just before making landfall. What are your thoughts on that?
Interesting.
Nathan? No.
Definitely a possibility if it slows down.
What I was just going to say in response to Nathan's information from the NHC is that the new NHC track forecast is essentially unchanged through the first 2 to 3 days, but has been adjusted southward and somewhat slower than the previous advisories at the 96 and 120 hours. Users, viewers, when looking at the track, they have to keep in or are reminded not to focus on the exact forecast track, as typical forecast errors at days 4 and 5. And Nathan, this is something that I've picked up on around 155 to 205 miles.
The forecast error, yes. It's around 200 miles either way on day 5, which is a lot.
Yes, so that's I think 0.3 to
a lot of glitchy satellites this evening as well, by the looks of things there.
Yes.
If you've not seen it yet, this is another look at the National Hurricane Center's forecast cone for the storm as it is right now. And as you can see, day 4 and 5 is much less certain than day 0 to 3. The day 3 cone is the one that has the whitish fill, and then the hatched area beyond that is the day 3 to 5 cone. So you can see just how the uncertainty ramps up as you get later in that forecast. For instance, the National Hurricane Center's cones are typically have half the confidence on day 5 that it has on day 3. So there's pretty much twice the chance that it could go a different way than what it would suggest on day 3. So that is still a very big deal. Almost the whole state of Florida is underneath the cone. So there are a lot of areas that could still be impacted by this, although I think we would say that the main threat of the storm would be Lake Okeechobee area northwards perhaps. There is still an outside chance the storm could make landfall further south of there, but it would appear rather unlikely, and that it looks like it will be a little bit further north than that.
So the key message, viewers, us, is that days 4 to 5, the gap of the cone
doubles,
and I'm just picking up on a couple of questions, Nathan, from the viewers. Sorry, I've just lost it.
Well, I think
it is slowing. I stand corrected. It is slowing.
It's not slowing at the minute. It will eventually.
Eventually, which stalling. So that
potentially, we don't know if it's going to stall or not.
Possibility.
We certainly don't know if it's going to stall. But what you can get from this imagery here is that day 3 to 5, the storm really slows down. Because don't forget, up to the 4th M dot there, or the 4th dot, that is... So the first 4 dots on that forecast are 12-hourly positions, and then after that it's 24-hourly. So it's doing a decent speed for the first 24-hour point into Sunday, but then after that it slows down almost to half its former speed. We've got some more questions. Does 90W have a decent shot at becoming Ling Ling? I can tell you that it did. Model runs a few days ago wanted it to become a major typhoon, well the GFS did, but now it doesn't look like models are supporting it. There is maybe a little bit of support for 91W though. That one could become the next named storm in the Western Pacific. Not yet though. Could Dorian die out prior to landfall? Well, that really is very wishful thinking, I'm afraid. I think the chances of that are less than the chances of it becoming a Category 5, quite honestly. How strong do we think Dorian will be at landfall? National Hurricane Center say Category 4. We're actually still going with a high-end Category 3 landfall on our forecast. Not much difference between the two apart from that category. It's just on that borderline, and we've just gone a little bit below that borderline. National Hurricane Center have gone above it. Nonetheless, it could still be catastrophic by the time it does make landfall, even if it's a low Category 3 or even a high-end Category 2. It's not all down to the intensity. Do we think Lake Okeechobee could flood? Well, there's two Floridians in here who will know more than that about me than I do.
So I believe the last time that when Irma was coming to Florida and like all that, they drained Lake Okeechobee, so then the water could all get like saturated in or something like that, and so like it could like all like fall in and make sure that this doesn't flood. I don't know if they're gonna do that again here. I think that would be what they would do, and I think it will. Like if they do that, then I don't think it's gonna flood, but I could definitely be extremely wrong with that.
Let's hope not. Of course, there are some historic lessons from the lake as well, aren't there?
They have a current water pumping system that should help minimize or help lower the chances of flooding compared to, let's say, the hurricane. I forgot. Excuse me. That was one of the there was only 4 hurricanes make landfall. It hit Florida in the 20s.
The Lake Okeechobee hurricane.
Yeah, yes, that one. Excuse me. Yeah, the Lake Okeechobee
1928.
hurricane. Yeah, obviously there's in the past 80, 90 years, there's been a massive difference in technology, and now we have a system that can pump water out of it, which drastically lowers the chances of Lake Okeechobee flooding. However, it's still certainly is a possibility.
Latest imagery here once again. Let's go back to the infrared channel on this picture. Yeah, look, you see the eye, sort of the temperatures were starting to go up again near the center. The eye might have been just maybe coming out, but no, not really. It's going away again. It's going to be that kind of cat and mouse game for quite a while. Already has been so far, until the eye really comes out, which could happen spontaneously, could happen without warning. This imagery is very up to date, actually. I've never known the imagery to be as up to date as this. It's less than a minute old, the last image on this screen here. So we're right up to date with what the storm is currently looking at like, and whether we can deduce anything from it, but not really, just that it does appear to be expanding a little bit. Convection is, well, not huge, but it's still doing what it needs to do there. We're just looking at the satellite imagery.
Oh, yeah.
Anyone have any more comments on that right now? Let's see if we can get any more questions as well. What are the odds that Dorian will be a Category 1, I assume they mean, at landfall? Well, that is, again, rather wishful thinking, although that is quite a bit more likely than making landfall as a nothing. I mean, you know, we could see a Florence situation where it was initially forecasted to strike as a Category 4, weakened rather miraculously before landfall and only struck as a Category 1. But that was because Florence really, really slowed down before landfall and lost all of its momentum. This storm would have to do the same. Whether it does or not is still very much up in the air. As we've started to see creeping into that 5-day forecast is the potential that it could slow down some more. and that might be detrimental to its intensity, although it might not, because the Gulf Stream is piping hot, 29 degrees Celsius or so, and so there's plenty of energy for the storm to tap into, and it could have the reverse effect in this part of the world, where the sea surface temperatures are warmer next to the coast, and it could spend more time intensifying rather than weakening. What I would say is, if the storm actually stalls, it doesn't matter how hot the sea surface temperatures are. If it stalls in the same place for about a day, the upwelling will really get to the storm, the sea surface temperatures will decline quite markedly, and then the storm will suffer. So if it did actually stall and stay in the same place for a whole day, somewhere out at sea, that would be good news. I don't think that's going to happen.
It's unfortunate that that's strong. Not going to stall out shore, though.
Yeah, no. Is there a chance of Dorian becoming a Category 5? Well, we were talking about this yesterday. We had our percentage chance at 1%. The day before, or the morning before, we had it at 0.3%. It's now up to 2%, so it's creeping up extremely slowly. There is still very little precedent of a Category 5 storm existing from where Dorian was tracking in the Eastern Caribbean. No storms have come from the Eastern Caribbean as a tropical storm and become a Category 5 outside of the Caribbean or the Gulf of Mexico. So the climatological odds are extremely against it, by infinity to nil. But obviously, with only 170 years of reliable storm data, well, maybe not completely reliable, but data on its own, that is only a tiny snapshot into what the world has experienced over a very long time, and who knows, Category 5s are quite possible in this area. Of course, Floyd almost did it in 1999, a very borderline Category 4-5 storm that was affecting the northernmost Bahamas, a pressure of 921, I believe. So that one was very impressive. Could have been a Category 5. Whether this one gets anywhere near that still remains to be seen. No guarantee that it will get to the stronger categories yet, until you actually see it in front of your own eyes. At the minute, though, things are looking very good for Dorian. It flew out of the traps when it passed Puerto Rico and intensified to reach hurricane status in the first place, and that was ahead of schedule. And now the National Hurricane Center project that it will become a Category 3 by tomorrow afternoon. So if that happens, it's well on track for Category 4 status. Ethan?
Yes?
Did you want to say something? I'm sorry.
I did. I posted in the live room a threat graphic for Dorian. And as it says on the graphic, the risk of life-threatening storm surge continues to increase in the northern Bahamas and Florida. And the big uncertainty with really every single threat is we don't know where it's going to occur. I mean, we could have highest rainfalls in the Bahamas and lower amounts towards Florida. We don't know. And also, Dorian is forecast to make landfall as an extremely dangerous Category 4 hurricane on Monday. It is too early to say exactly where the highest winds will occur. Regardless of Dorian's track, heavy rainfall can be expected over portions of the Bahamas and Florida beginning over the weekend. Britain should have their hurricane place really beginning right now, and it should remain in place until next week.
I know we have two people in here in Florida, and I'm eager to know more about how preparations have been going. Has there been... what's the attitude that people are exhibiting? Are they there right now?
I'm not sure.
Because I'm just seeing some, some people writing into us talking about how things have been extremely busy in the stores. And of course, we've seen since yesterday some stores get completely cleaned out of their products, especially water. Okay, what? Yuxinator, are you there right now?
Yeah.
Yeah, I was just asking, how are people's attitudes towards this storm right now? Are they worried, frightened, calm, orderly?
Okay, so I've been trying to text my friends to see how they think. One of them's concerned, but most of them, if I were to be like they're like concerned, I guess.
Of course.
But I think the thing that I've noticed is, for example, today when I went to campus, I basically noticed that there was a bunch of things happening.
Yes.
Like as in, I'm sorry. Basically, it didn't look like many people were concerned.
Yeah, but no one's panicking or anything like that, are they?
Mm,
Of course, the storm is still some distance out, and there are a lot of people who are under threat from this storm. Not all of the people who are currently under threat will experience life-threatening conditions, because the storm will inevitably miss some areas that are currently in that cone of uncertainty. And of course, it's a rather large one, as we are still pretty early days into tracking Dorian. As we switch back
I have some news here. The last reconnaissance flight into Dorian, the low-level recon, was this morning, and one low-level recon has just taken off from Lakeland, Florida, and is headed towards the storm. It's about time.
So recon are going back to investigate the storm tonight. How long do you think it will take to get there?
I'm not sure, but maybe 2 hours or so, maybe.
How fast do they fly when they're going towards the hurricane?
I think about 500, 600 miles per hour, around there.
That's rather fast. So it should get there in less than 2 hours then. Because at present the storm is, I think it's 974 miles from Orlando. I think there's more questions at this point. Will it go into the Gulf of Mexico? Well, you can see that nearly half of the cone is over the Gulf of Mexico, so I would say chance have probably gone down a little bit. I'd put it down to about 40% chance that the storm will enter the Gulf of Mexico at this stage. I was going around 50-50 yesterday, so that's rather interesting as well. A rather off-topic for the time question there. What inspired us to do the weather? I think we'll probably be going on about that for quite some time.
yeah.
Very long stories, but maybe we'll check back up on that at a quieter time. I think we had that question actually, so let's see what else we've got. Is there a chance of Dorian making landfall near Orlando? Well, where's the closest point to Orlando for a landfall? I suppose that would be Cape Canaveral, really. And the region.
I'd have to look on the map.
Yeah.
No, yes, Cape Canaveral. Cape Canaveral.
So
yes, it would indeed be Cape Canaveral.
I mean, if we're thinking about Orlando, it might be moving northwest when it makes landfall, so a worst case would appear to be a landfall near Palm Bay or Melbourne for potentially the storm moving over Orlando.
My local Air Force base, MacDill Air Force Base, has ordered evacuations of all military aircraft.
Yes, well, a few bases have done that in Florida, haven't they?
As we speak right now, actually, I can hear them coming over my house. They're evacuating all military planes out of the base right now. C-130s, F-16s, F-15s, F-22 Raptors, etc.
Crazy. And where are they going? Do you know? There's one near Jacksonville that was evacuated yesterday. They went to Ohio. They'll probably be going up that way somewhere as well.
If I'm not mistaken, they've ordered some to Nebraska and a couple others to New Orleans.
Ah. Well, hopefully the storm doesn't go to New Orleans. It shouldn't.
Hopefully not.
But back to that original question, the chance of it making landfall in the Cape Canaveral area and then moving on to Orlando is actually pretty high, yes. With that is a very plausible scenario, although just as plausible, it could make landfall near Daytona Beach, or it could even make landfall further south near Lake Okeechobee, West Palm Beach, and that sort of region. Another comment there saying the European model showing 2 new Atlantic systems next week. It's been saying that for a while, actually. So that is something we really should be watching out for in the first week of September. Could be 2 Cape Verde systems that form. They would be a long-range, well, maybe not a threat to the US. We'd have to see what actually happens. But if they do go onto a threat effect land, there'd be even more time than we've had with Dorian to check those out. Let's see what else we have here. Could Dorian stall over Florida, making rainfall even more deadly? That's what we're really trying to ascertain as we go through tonight's stream. Looks like it's more likely that there's going to be a slowdown when it makes landfall in Florida, and if that occurs, then obviously the rainfall rates will increase, the rainfall accumulations, and already, even if the storm progresses at a normal speed without slowing down very much, we're still looking at about 20 inches near the center of the storm's track. So if it did stall, then I don't know, you might want to double that.
Well, actually, going back to your previous statement, I do believe Cape Canaveral or around that area is the highest chance of receiving landfall right now as of this advisory.
Yeah, I'll go on to the... Alright, we'll bring some wind probabilities to you now. So, just to read these out, the percentage chances of tropical storm force winds occurring in these locations in the next 5 days. And whilst I talk about these, we'll show you the wind speed probabilities so you can follow it with us. So, Florence, South Carolina, 3%, Columbia 4, Myrtle Beach 5, Georgetown 5, Charleston 9, Beaufort 14, Atlanta, Georgia 3, Augusta 3, Savannah 17, Kings Bay 36, Waycross 26, Mayport, Florida 48, Jacksonville 40, Gainesville 51, Daytona Beach 66, The Villages 65, Orlando 76, Cocoa Beach 89% chance, Patrick Air Force Base 82, Fort Pierce 93% chance of tropical storm force winds. Again, that is not 93% chance of a landfall occurring there, but the 93% chance that it will be within the storm's wind field, which can sometimes extend 100 miles or more. As we keep going, West Palm Beach at 92%, Fort Lauderdale 86%, Miami 65%, Homestead 57%, Marathon 42%, Key West 35% chance still of tropical storm force winds, Naples 59%, Fort Myers 66%, Venice 65%, Tampa 67%, Cedar Key 60%, Tallahassee 25%, St. Mark's 29%, Apalachicola 32%, Panama City 24% now, nearly a quarter chance of tropical storm force winds there. Destin 13%, Columbus, Georgia 7%, Montgomery, Alabama 4%, Pensacola 7%, Mobile 4%, Gulfport 3%. Don't worry there just yet. And for the Bahamas, Grand Bahama 95% chance, New Providence 68%, Andros Island 40%, Great Exuma 25%, and San Salvador 34%. So those are all the wind probabilities at this time. The National Hurricane Center won't update for another 6 hours. You may remember last night's stream. Was it last night that they did the intermediate advisory still?
Yeah, last night.
They won't be doing an intermediate advisory tonight, so the next update will be at 11 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time. More questions.
Nathan,
go ahead.
I'm sorry. There's a question. I'm sorry. Let me read it. Oh, it says that a person is saying that his uncle lives in Port St. Lucie, and he's lived there for over 8 years, and he has never evacuated for any hurricane. Should he leave for Dorian? Well, at this point, I would say he should definitely considering it. Mm-hmm. And a lot of times, is people, they've never experienced the full brunt of a hurricane, and unfortunately a hurricane like this can make landfall in that area. It could unfortunately cause harm to him or unfortunately cost their life, which is the case with a lot of hurricanes.
Unfortunately, we just can't tell you yet whether they will feel the biggest effects of the storm or any particular area All that we can say is the percentage chances of tropical storm force winds, which in itself can be destructive, is getting towards 90% in that area. Just to read out as well the hurricane force wind probability, I'm not going to read them all, just for those particular areas very close to where the landfall could be. So Fort Pierce, which has the highest tropical storm force winds chance, it has a 48% chance of hurricane force winds. That's nearly a half chance of seeing hurricane conditions at Fort Pierce. 42% at West Palm Beach and 37% at Cocoa Beach. I'm not sure where exactly Port St. Lucie is in between those places. My geography is a bit scatty. It is very close to Fort Pierce actually. So yeah, nearly a half chance for that region. Do we think the high over Georgia and North Carolina will cause the storm to weaken? Well, they don't really work like that. High pressures block storms, they don't really weaken them. Now, if a high pressure pushes a storm towards an area that's less favourable for development, then I suppose you could say that it had a hand in weakening the storm, but directly, not really at all, no.
Excuse me, I'm sorry.
No, go right ahead.
A high pressure, like Nathan said before, it typically steers a storm as well as a jet stream. A hurricane, to weaken a hurricane, to really like grab and weaken it, is dry air, wind shear, low sea surface temperatures. If you want a conducive environment for a hurricane would be, or a tropical cyclone, would be warm sea surface temperatures, a humid and moist environment.
The biggest one, and probably the most fundamental one for the hurricanes, is the sea surface temperatures, because that is their energy source, and the high pressure will end up pushing the storm into Florida, so it will lose that energy source, and that's why storms weaken so much over land, of course.
Yes, exactly.
Let's see what else we have now. I think we've got everything by... okay, we got some more questions here. Will Freeport get hurricane winds? Well, yes, let's just read out what they've got on the National Hurricane Center's predictions as well. So we're talking about... That's Grand Bahama, isn't it? 53% chance of hurricane conditions there right now. So that is rising above half chance. I think they will end up getting hurricane conditions on at least one of those islands. Whether it arrives in Freeport, it's got a pretty decent chance. Can't say it for certain just yet, but I think one of the Bahamian islands will get hurricane force winds.
Right now, the National Hurricane Center are forecasting a landfall just north of Port St. Lucie, or closer to Vero Beach at the moment. They are forecasting a Cat 4 landfall, though, and that's going to be pretty catastrophic for that area.
130 miles per hour, correct?
I'd just
Yes.
like to add something to what Ethan has said. Dorian is now making national news over here in Australia.
Oh my.
Yep, they are, and the Channel 7 News Melbourne, they're saying a very dangerous system.
No doubt.
That's how it's being reported over here, and the risk is there. And preparations, as I said earlier, you've got to consider what's out there with the information, evacuation. Well, it's a possibility, and I'm thinking of the road system over there. If you're going to evacuate, go now, because the roads are just going to get congested. But
yeah, there's going to be millions of evacuations if the storm continues to intensify, especially if this uncertainty remains, because when if it's going to strike central Florida, then the cone of uncertainty will still include southern Florida, so there's going to be loads of confusion about whether people in southern Florida should evacuate or not, and whether people in central Florida should evacuate south or north. All of this is about to come, so it's not looking too great at this point. But there are still a few days before it does materialize.
Now landfall possibly Sunday night or Monday?
They're saying Monday at the moment.
Mm-hmm.
But that could switch if it keeps going at its normal pace without that slowdown. Then it will be on Sunday. If it does slow down, then it could be any time after Sunday, really. Anyone's guess, really. I think we have some more questions as well. Here's a question for the team. What radar program would you use for tracking weather, like severe weather and hurricanes?
Radar scope. It's one of the best radar programs that I've ever bought because it has velocity. It has really everything that you need, really. Even has spotter reports, and it's a lot of things combined in one.
Will Dorian hit Miami?
It's too early to say if it will or not, but if you're in Miami, I'd just stay on alert for now and have your hurricane plan in place.
Yeah, it could, but at the same time, from what it looks like at this moment, I doubt it will hit Miami. It'll. I don't feel like he did it.
Yeah, we just about made it through with your signal there. What are the chances this storm sneaks in between Florida and Cuba? No. I really, really don't think so. Not impossible, but the chance of that, very low.
Well, that high would actually have to collapse, wouldn't it, or just get bigger?
It'd have to be really big to push the storm that far south. There was another question there about what is SATID saying. Earlier on, about 3 hours ago, it was saying 89 miles per hour. That was part of the reason why we have upped it on our estimate to 90 miles per hour, the latest update. We're taking a short break now here at Force 13 HQ. We'll be back in a few moments with another hour of coverage on the hurricane. You can send in more questions through this short break, and we'll be back with you in just a few moments. Continues in a moment. You can also help the project become even better by becoming a patron. You can see more information about all the benefits involved by visiting patreon.com/Force13. With a special thanks to these people for being our most valued patrons this month. You can also check out our growing merch store so you can show Force 13's colors wherever you go. You can also find a link to our Discord server underneath this video in the description. You're watching Force 13's live streaming service. Hello, welcome back to Force 13's live coverage of Hurricane Dorian. At this hour, it is just past 6 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time. Dorian is a Category 1 on the Saffir-Simpson scale with estimated wind speeds, according to us, of 90 miles per hour. The National Hurricane Center sticking with 85 miles per hour at the moment. Not much difference between the two. It's a Category 1. It could become Category 2 later tonight or overnight tonight, and then could reach Category 3 by tomorrow. That's what National Hurricane Center are expecting. Just to reiterate this rather extraordinary fact, Dorian is around 4 days away from reaching Florida, and all major models agree with a Florida landfall. That is the earliest time that all models have agreed on a landfall in relation to it actually happening. Certainly that I've ever seen. It's quicker than the models took deciding Irma, deciding Andrew, deciding Jean in 2004. Quicker than all of those, and I think that's rather rare even. Such a consensus at such an early time means that the chances of tropical storm conditions along the Florida coast are very high, up above 90% now in some areas. My name's Nathan Foy. Joining me tonight is the team, which consists in this hour of Yuxinator, who's in Florida, as is Mike. Also outside of the state, we have David, Orlando, Dimitri, and Sam.
Right.
Good evening to everybody.
Good evening.
Good evening, everyone.
Nice to see you all.
And hi from me.
Hello.
Good evening.
We've not heard from Dimitri very much yet, so let's say hello to you, and how are you tonight, and what are your thoughts on the storm?
Good evening. I've not been paying too much attention to the storm until today, but what I can say about it is that I wasn't surprised that the storm wasn't strengthening right now at the 5 p.m. Yep. At the last update, because of the hour replacement cycle that was in play. So I wasn't surprised there.
Not looking quite as good on the satellite imagery right now. Yeah, go on. What do you think?
Right. I think it's a major hurricane, but I think it's going to end up a major hurricane, but I don't know about Category 4.
Yes. That's a very borderline case, I think, at the moment, whether it will get there or not. If the conditions do align, it could really rapidly intensify and get to that status rather quickly.
Nathan, we are seeing right now in the latest frames of satellite imagery, we are seeing another convection flare in Dorian, which means seeing an eye is not likely the next couple hours or so.
Probably not. It's playing that game, and all of the weather community get completely hyped up when they see the eye starting to clear a little bit, and literally minutes later it folds in on itself again. This is a recent phenomenon because we've not had 1 minute imagery. We've only had it for a few years. It never used to be this way. We used to only have 15-minute imagery. And for those who remember that very long ago, 30-minute imagery or even 3-hourly imagery back 30 years ago. But now as we look at it here, 1 minute imagery, it's very easy for people to have knee-jerk reactions as to what the storm's actually doing. We've got to wait and see whether we can establish a trend. At the moment, all it's telling us right now is that there's still a lot of upheaval in and around the storm's eye. and that will continue at least for a little bit longer. But there is certainly a potential that overnight tonight or very late tonight, it could maybe start to pop out that eye properly again.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe for the past 24 hours, I mean, every couple hours we see an eye start to pop up and then start to pop out, and out of nowhere a convection flare would come and get rid of that, and it keeps doing that for the past 24 hours or so.
Let's just go back to a visible look at this, because daylight will be fading now, so we don't have that many more opportunities to look at visible imagery. There's the latest. Looks like we've only got about half an hour to an hour left of daylight before the storm vanishes into the darkness on the visible imagery, and you can see convection blowing up still around the western and towards the southwestern side. Looks much better on the visible than it does on the infrared, that must be said, at this point. David, any thoughts? Oh, he mustn't be with us right now. Let's talk to Sam then. You've just joined us in this hour. You were with us on last night's stream as well, weren't you?
Yes, I've been tracking the storm throughout pretty much the entire stream yesterday. And I've been constantly looking back at it and looking for updates. But I just got onto look at some of the recent models with the GFS and the ECMWF. And the model consensus is starting to shift towards on a more southerly track in terms of where it's going to make landfall in Florida. So now earlier we saw the GFS take this thing up to the northern coast of Florida, and now a lot of the models are starting to take it more towards the southern part of Florida, and that's going to include places like Miami and potentially Miami, Fort Lauderdale, Palm Beach. We're still considering Orlando and Tampa. It really depends on where. There's still a lot of uncertainty in where exactly the storm is going to go.
As we continue to look at that visible imagery there, still blowing up a little bit, and the threats remain somewhat unclear still at this point. All of those places could be affected by tropical storm force winds even.
Yes, I've also and especially with the uncertainty and what its size it's going to be when it hits Florida, we're talking about potentially other states as well. So like Georgia, even territories like the Bahamas and the Gulf Coast. It all depends on the track and size and even intensity of the storm.
Yes, let's take some more questions, because there's a lot of questions that are coming in. You can send in your own as well on the chat section if you're watching us on YouTube, and also on Facebook as well. David will pick the ones up on Facebook. Here's some questions here. What are the chances of Dorian making landfall in Georgia and not Florida? I would say the chances now have shrunk quite a bit. There is still an outside chance of that happening. Let's just see if we can get up those models right now. Hold on, we're scooting right the way back. Yes, we have this here. First of all, completely get rid of the CLP5, TCLP, and TABD. Those are statistical models that have no idea that a massive high-pressure ridge is to the storm's north. So take a look at all the other ones there on the scope, and it's becoming pretty decisive. To be honest, it's seldom that we see such good agreement on a storm's track, especially when the United States is involved.
I'm more surprised to see that there are now a couple of models a couple of outlier models that are actually taking this. Even one is just taking it right out to sea, surprisingly.
Well, those are the ones I just told you to discount, though, right?
Yeah, I would not pay attention to those at all, really.
Yeah, no, those models have no idea there's a massive high pressure ridge to the storm's north, so they're completely useless. Ignore them.
Basically.
The COTI you can just about see brushing the coast, doesn't quite make landfall. That is towards the edge of plausibility. Just to look at what those models have been saying on intensity as well, you can see them here. So the consensus is still towards mid to high range category 3. National Hurricane Center going with category 4 in their forecast. And right at the very top, some models there towards mid-range category 4. None of them predicting category 5 at the 18Z runs. That's the latest. There'll be another one in around 2 hours time. So that was a look at that, and just to reiterate some of these key messages, they're important. The risk of life-threatening storm surge and hurricane-force winds this weekend continues to increase in the northwestern Bahamas, and hurricane watches could be issued there tonight or on Friday. Residents should have their hurricane plan in place and listen to advice given by local emergency officials. There's an increasing likelihood of life-threatening storm surge along portions of the Florida East Coast late this weekend or early next week, although it's too soon to determine where the highest storm surge will occur just yet. Residents should have their hurricane plan in place, know if they are in a hurricane evacuation zone, and listen to advice given by local emergency officials. Wherever the storm makes landfall, it will probably be quite a significant storm surge, we would expect, especially if it makes landfall at that right angle. The risk of devastating hurricane-force winds along the Florida East Coast and the peninsula late this weekend and early next week continues to increase as well, although it's too soon to determine where the strongest winds will occur. And regardless of the exact track of Dorian, heavy rains are expected to occur over portions of the Bahamas, Florida, and elsewhere in the southeastern United States this weekend and into the middle of next week. There we are again with that track forecast map as we go and take some more questions here. What if Dorian grows bigger than Florida? That's not really going to happen. I would be extremely surprised if that ever happened. So don't really worry about Dorian becoming bigger than the whole state of Florida. Okay. Is Category 4 likely now? Looking at major news networks, they're saying that Dorian is going to make a landfall as a Category 4, and our thoughts. Well, the major news networks will use the National Hurricane Center's official track forecast, which is calling for a 130 mile per hour landfall. That's just about into the Category 4 range. We're still looking towards a high-end Category 3 landfall on our forecast at the moment, which is only 5 miles per hour different. There isn't actually that much of a difference between the two, but nonetheless, it's still a very severe landfall, and there is certainly the potential that if the storm intensifies now, let's just scoot back over again. Just want to see if we can demonstrate this. So these were the models again for Dorian. Oh, it's gone off my screen again. We'll go the other way then. Oh, just to point out as well, two little areas of interest there in the Central Pacific right now, 0% for both of them. Just bringing us back to Dorian. There you can see on the models again. So some of them calling for Category 3 within 24 hours of 18Z, which is about 4 hours ago now. So in the next 20 hours, if it gets beyond the low end of Category 3 status, so if it's mid or high range Category 3, by the time we get to lunchtime tomorrow, then it has done better than expected, and all those model runs will have to adjust themselves upwards, and so that is how we could possibly look at a stronger landfall than what they're predicting, minimal Category 4 at the moment. What are the chances? Yes.
No, go ahead, Nathan.
I was talking a lot, but I'll let you come in just a moment. What are the chances of tropical storm force winds in Lake Alfred? Now, pardon my awful geography knowledge, I've no idea where that is. That is in Polk County, not far from Lakeland, if I'm not mistaken. So yeah, that's
Polk County is just north of Tampa.
So again, you know, that is one of the many locations in Florida that could get directly under the hurricane when it makes landfall. Of course, it being inland, the wind speeds won't be as severe, but they could still be hurricane force. This will all occur on Monday or Tuesday, though, so it's a very long way out and things could change. But I would say would be the biggest worry in those areas is the rainfall totals. I don't know how those lakes respond to massive amounts of rain, but you could be looking at 20 inches in those areas. Mike?
Yes, Mike, guys. Sorry, just having a look. Yes. Wow. That's okay. Yeah. In the past month, we've had rain. Actually, historical amounts of rain. We've had flooding in rivers in the area, Lakeland, Orlando, Tampa, Gainesville, even some places south. Sinkholes is a definite probability for these areas. So if you were caught in the storm and floodwaters are in your area, do not, and I please ask you this, do not walk outside because you can end up in a sinkhole. I mean, you could drown in the first place, but worst case scenario is a sinkhole. What a sinkhole does in a floodwater is it essentially sucks you down and could drown you very easily. So we encourage you not to go out in floodwaters at all.
Indeed, and of course, areas prone to flooding, given the rainfall that Florida has had recently, would you recommend everyone in flood-prone areas to evacuate?
At the current moment, no. But if the current forecast has it a Category 3 by lunchtime tomorrow, I would certainly consider evacuating those areas. Like I said, like Nathan said before, the model agreements, I've never seen model agreements so close together, so in agreement that they're making landfall in Florida. And that should really, for you Florida residents, that should really tell you something. You should really consider evacuating or making your preparations, because this is not a joke. This is something to be taken seriously. And if not taken seriously or not taken proper cautions, harm could be done to you and your family, and in some cases, unfortunately, you can lose your life.
Now, we don't hype things up here, or we don't blow things out of proportion, but I just want to really emphasize how remarkably these models are in agreement. Now, okay, models weren't as good back in 1992, but for Hurricane Andrew, which made landfall in Florida and it bended further towards the south than expected, the models only reached complete agreement that it would make landfall in the state of Florida 24 hours before it actually made landfall. For other storms, just trying to find my quote again. I posted it somewhere. Okay, I've lost it now. I'm just trying to go off memory then. I think for Jeanne in 2004, the lead time was about 72 hours or something like that. The models finally figured out that it would make landfall in Florida. And what was the other example? Irma. No, Jeanne, I think it was only 24 hours out for that one as well. And for Irma, I think it was about 72 hours. When the models finally closed in on making landfall in Florida. This is about 108 hours out, or maybe getting towards 96 now. That's 4 days, and all the major models are convinced that it's going to make landfall. So, you know, that is something that we've really got to take on board. The main question really at this stage is exactly how strong is it going to be, which areas are going to get the worst affected, how much rain is going to fall, will it stall as it makes landfall, and these questions we're going to try and address, but it's going to take several days before we actually know these answers for sure. Will Dorian hit West Palm Beach is a question that we get here. Chances are very high for tropical storm force winds there. For hurricane force winds, they're moderate. If the track continues to shift south, I would start worrying over there as well. Strad has now joined us. Good evening.
Good evening. How's everyone doing tonight so far? I've seen
we're great.
At a call class, I was monitoring the stream. You guys have been doing a spectacular job so far.
Well, thanks for joining us, making it better, I'm sure. What are your thoughts on Dorian? Have you been looking at the satellite imagery?
I have been taking peeks of the satellite imagery through the past several hours. Unfortunately, from parts of last summer, we thought it would begin rapidly intensifying That dry air allotment really got its way into the center and hindered it. It looks like it's trying to improve again, but it looks like some new dry air's trying to grab in a bit.
I'm not convinced that it's shaking off that dry air.
Not yet, because you just kind of see that bit of entrailment of a bit kind of greenish convection that's not really the yellows or oranges.
To the northwest.
Kind of wrapping. Exactly.
Yeah.
And that's a bit concerned for the storm's development, fortunate for us. But
actually, let's see if we can go into the water vapor imagery here. That would be very useful for us.
Yeah. But favorable conditions are ahead of the storm, and now they're saying Category 4 peak is expected right near landfall. And some of the other potentially outlandish computer models are still going significantly higher than that. We can't say they're outlandish necessarily. The NHC has actually been on the high end for the overall forecast intensity at this point in time, but almost all of them show at least a Category 3 at this point in time, which is still devastating nonetheless. The other thing I've seen, there's been a bit of shift in the models. Again, not as many taking it into the Gulf, more of them pushing it into Florida and then curling it up the peninsula into the rest of the state, which for prolonged flooding could be devastating for landfall areas and a bit further inland as well. That's the trend I've been seeing over the past 24 hours. I was noticing I was kind of cheating in my college class and actually watching the stream during it, that there was some recon heading into the storm, if I'm not mistaken.
They're on the way, aren't they? I don't know when exactly they will get there.
Yeah, it looks like there's one plane in right now, maybe two, that's starting to head towards it. Probably by 2 hours from now we'll start to get first information. And I see that you have the water vapor imagery up there as well.
Yeah, what do you think of it?
It's not really the usual color scheme that I'm used to, but from what I can gather, the blues are drier. It looks like it's trying to wrap in again a little bit. I think we're in a situation that kind of stair-stepping thing that we were talking about last night seems to be more the relevant way that the storm is going to continue to develop until this dryer is shaken out, probably in the next 24 hours or so, and then we can get some actual development in terms of intensity going. It does look markedly better than when we went offline last night at 11 p.m. when it was starting to look a lot more comma-shaped and lopsided.
Yes.
But it still has a lot more work to do regardless in terms of strengthening to a very powerful hurricane, which is the current forecast. Right as I say that, the forecast intensity graphic that we have on screen, interestingly enough.
The wind chances on the left, yeah.
Yeah, now the wind chances are coming back up on the screen right now. I mean, regardless really of what happens, it's an extremely dangerous storm right now. It's coming in at an angle that's seldom seen for tropical cyclones, in an area that even more seldom sees significant storm surge effects. When I say that, the angle of the storm, and because cyclones rotate counterclockwise in the northern hemisphere, means north of where the storm makes landfall will be heavy storm surge, and low-lying areas, because the peninsula's rather flat, in places that aren't used to seeing storm surge. So there can be underprepared as well. This was mentioned last night, but I'm going to mention again, which is why people in those particular areas should be paying extra attention to the development of the system, listening to local officials for any information regarding evacuations or orders, listening to advisories on where to get supplies, such as sandbags, to protect their homes and other areas of business or locations of family, and just staying on top of the game in general, keeping up to date with the news.
And where are we with that state of emergency right now? Was that extended today?
I'm not quite sure. I think the governor went really preemptive and declared 32 counties state of emergency yesterday. So
yeah, they did some yesterday.
I believe the entire state of Florida is now under the state of emergency for Dorian.
Wouldn't surprise me.
Yeah. Someone in the chat saying that GFS 18Z moved Dorian further south again. I'm trying to see how valid that is. Wi-Fi at school just isn't really the best.
I think it did.
The GFS is trying to take it into the Gulf of Mexico now.
Oh God!
No, is it? No, it barely doesn't.
No.
It takes it right over Tampa, and then pushes it up through the rest of Florida.
Gosh.
Yeah, has to make landfall around Fort Lauderdale, try to cross towards Naples and Tampa, then move north through the rest of the peninsula into the Panhandle, and then go back out to sea, paralleling the east coast around Georgia area. Although that part is a bit more long term. The Europeans been hinting at something similar, though, the past several hours, or not the past several hours, the past 24 hours or so. But I think the difference is that the Euro takes it further south and then gives it a sharper turn to the north.
All right, we've got lots of questions we ought to get through. Do we think the Palm Bay and Melbourne area, I assume, could be in trouble from the storm? HWIF shows a landfall nearby. Not just that model either, but really the model consensus has really that area under a great amount of threat.
Yeah, totally agree with that.
Does Dorian look a bit like Gloria? It's a question I've received here.
No idea. You're the cyclone man.
I'm the history person in some sort of way. Well, it's nowhere near where Gloria was. But to my knowledge, I don't think it really does look like that. I think we did answer this question, but I'm seeing it a lot still. Will Dorian hit West Palm Beach? Well, it looks like it will be south of the storm, but of course, if the forecast continues to trend south, then it's going to be very bad news there. Is there a chance for Dorian to hit South Carolina? It won't do it with its first landfall. Now, maybe it could turn back out towards the ocean again, make a second landfall there later on. That is not out of the question. But at the minute, we can't really say. Any new updates about where Dorian will go after landfall? That's pretty much expanding on that question as well.
If you might take a crack at this, still a bit to really give anything definitive, but from what we are starting to see just in trends, yesterday we were talking, could it go into the Gulf of Mexico afterwards? There's becoming a more apparent trend in the models now that this could potentially stall slightly over Florida and then move up through the peninsula into the rest of the state and then into the southeast, which was kind of what the GFS was hinting at yesterday, except now models are falling in line that could happen, but with a landfall further south latitude, more towards the center of the peninsula rather than near to the Jacksonville area, which was what the GFS was indicating. Although there still are significant outliers, the HMON takes it a west-southwest dive towards Miami. The HWF still brings it into the Gulf of Mexico. The Euro is becoming interesting in its own right, having a barely clipped Florida coming in at a west-southwest angle and taking a sharp turn up the coast.
All right.
So there's a very high certainty that Florida will get impacted pretty significantly, but how so and how it gets to further down the line to other states is very much up in the air at this point in time.
Yuxinator, I think you wanted to speak.
I just want to say him back, but I also think that for the hurricanes and stuff like that, there's like it hugging the coast is definitely a possibility. And if it doesn't, it's gonna be catastrophic. That's hugging the coast as it goes up.
Yes, and a stall possibility is also certain, which could lead to massive amounts of rainfall.
Given the continuing upward model intensity trend, is it likely that Dorian will be a strong Category 4 or even a Category 5 by the time it makes landfall? Is a question that we receive here.
Category 4.
Mon at the moment likes to be the outlier out of everyone, so.
I mean, I could see it. Obviously, there's Hurricane Michael, for example, of hurricanes that have done this, but so it's not out of the possibility, but the possibility is very low.
Yeah, I think the way to roll with that statement is that the forecast intensity peaks have upped as the days have gone by, but we were expecting to see more intensification at this point rather than a stalling out from that dry air entrailment. So the odds of Category 5, unless something else happens, are decreasing at this point in time, but Category 4 is still a high probability.
You think it's decreasing? Why do you think it's decreasing?
Well, I mean, we can still see rapid intensification, and that could somehow kind of pull a hat trick out of there that we aren't expecting. But this dry air entrailment that has kept it at moderate Category 1 strength for 24 hours now was, for the most extreme models expecting it to get to where they wanted it to be, was something that wouldn't have been as much of a factor at this point. However, it is notable that there is going to be 3 to 4 days of the storm over quite favorable conditions from this point out. So you can't really rule out anything, especially because it's a relatively small storm, at least compared to other systems that we've tracked that have posed significant threats to Florida in the past. So you can't rule anything out in particular, but odds of reaching Category 5 intensity aren't all that high. I know yesterday we were saying like 1%.
Today's 2%.
Okay, we're getting exponentially more likely then. Nah, but in all seriousness, Category 5 is extremely unlikely unless it goes beyond all expectations. The HMOD is the only one that says Category 5 right now, and that was the 12Z run for intensity guidance. The 18Z hasn't come out yet, and that even for the HMOD, it's a huge difference from yesterday when it was saying it wouldn't even be a hurricane. So the amount of trust you can put into that rogue one isn't necessarily all that high. What we can say for certain, this is going to be a very powerful and life-threatening storm, and that anyone in the area should definitely be paying attention for it. The intensity at that point is not fully certain yet, but it is going to, Dorian will be encountering pretty favorable conditions in the coming days. And because of that, we need to be keeping an eye on for quick intensification more than any potential stair-stepping that could be expected. And if this does get stronger than a minimal Category 4, which is currently forecast by the National Hurricane Center, and by no means don't think weak Category 4 is weak, because that's an incredibly powerful storm. If it manages to get past that expectations, then we need to be on even more high alert for potentially catastrophic damages to direct landfall areas.
Alright, does it look like the dry air has retreated from the center? Also, is Category 4 likely? We've had this question, I think, or at least part of it. But is dry air retreating?
I believe... go ahead, Strat.
No, I was just going to say, if you could pull up the 1-minute imagery, that's very telling. It looks like it's trying to choke out the dry air within, that kind of got trapped in right now. Nelson was actually in the chat earlier commenting about it briefly, but it looks like it's trying to filter it out again.
Let's pop back over to the water vapor imagery, which is going to tell us all that we need to know, we hope. There's still those blue areas to the northwest, which denote potential areas of dry air right now. Certainly drier.
Yeah. It's hard to see. It's not hard to see where it is. It's a bit difficult at the moment to tell if it's actually being able to wrap into the rest of the core circulation of the storm, or if it's getting pushed out, because you see convection right to the south of where that dry slot is, where you normally expect it to flow in and do the counterclockwise circulation. Convection right beneath that's actually bubbling up right now, getting stronger rather than having dry air cut into it and flow around. So to see if it gets choked out is something that's going to be interesting to watch in the coming day.
Yeah,
not even the coming day, just coming hours.
Seems like not far from the center of circulation, there's still a good inflow of dry air coming into the system. Now, I'm not sure how long it will take for the storm to choke off the dry air. I'm not sure, because I am seeing still a little bit of a dry air intrusion, but I don't expect that to last much longer, as it looks like it's closing off in the more recent frames.
Mm-hmm. And just for any more questions that people have, obviously going to be going over a lot of things in the next several hours, most likely. Start your message with Force 13 all in text so that we can see it light up for us in a nice bright orange. And also for everyone watching, make sure to leave a like on the stream if you're finding it informative. Share the link around with other people as well so we can keep even more people informed. And just make sure you keep watching. We'll answer as many questions as we possibly can.
You betcha. And when we're not live streaming, we're of course uploading videos generally as well. across the channel, so we're always active doing things and across social media as well. Let's get some more questions again. I'm seeing a lot of the same questions at the moment. Will it affect the Gulf Coast? If so, how badly? Well, I mean, Western Florida, the whole coastline is the Gulf Coast technically, so those areas could be affected rather significantly, particularly with heavy rainfall. It just depends how far over the storm tracks.
Yeah, but regardless, I don't think winds will be that big of an issue on the west and Gulf side as it will be on the east, because because as it does interact with the land, it will weaken pretty significantly in terms of wind, but it'll still, whether or not it's going to stay over land or enter the Gulf is still in question.
And what are the chances of Dorian hitting Miami and West Palm is a question that we get there as well. I mean, what the definition of hitting is the first thing we got to get straight. Tropical storm force winds, decent chance of both of those locations getting them. An actual landfall at Category 4 intensity would be very unlikely for Miami, but for West Palm Beach a little bit more likely, but still I wouldn't give it more than a half chance. It looks like it will be further north than that. But again, if the models shift south, if the forecast track shifts south, then you know that you'll be in more trouble, especially in the Palm Beach area. Let's see what else we have. You can send in your questions as we keep going here. We are here to serve as well as to show you all the latest information. Do we think it will hug the Florida coast like Matthew? The latest Euro model predicts this. Well, the latest Euro model first predicts an Andrew, and then it shifts away from Miami at the very last minute and becomes a Matthew. So that's great from the ECMWF. But that would be terrible, I think, by the sounds of things.
Yeah, that would be horrible. Like, that's the worst possible thing that could happen, in my opinion.
We're also now joined by Ryan. Good evening.
Hello.
Good evening, Ryan.
Welcome. And Dorian, are you surprised at all that it hasn't intensified very much today?
Well, I don't know. I mean, I was expecting rapid intensification. I feel like it just it's gonna come eventually. I just have that feeling it's going to come eventually.
I think a lot of us do. It will have at some point in its life. It's going to have that period.
Yeah,
it's not right now though.
Tonight will it be? Tomorrow night will it be just before landfall? Hopefully not, but we'll just have to see.
And another question I have: Does rapid intensification trend more towards the day or towards the night? Because we've seen, because there have been as long as I've been tracking storms, I've seen plenty of rapid intensification happen overnight.
Feels like it happens more overnight. I don't know why.
Yeah.
Yeah, speaking of intensification, there was a question bit up the chat that some people will probably answer. Someone's asking, why is Dorian not changed in strength from last night? I think the simplest answer was... Yeah, I was going to say exactly that. Once a couple hours into our coverage last night, dry air started to become a problem for the system.
Dry air and the concentric eye walls.
Yeah, it's true. It's been facing semi-eye wall replacement cycles, which is not very typical for a storm of this intensity, but with its size is where that can become more factor, because Dorian is a very small system. Just to give an emphasis on that, hurricane force winds extend only 15 nautical miles away from the center in the northeastern quadrant and only 10 nautical miles from the northwest and southeast.
Tiny.
So this is a very small system at this point in time. The radius of circulation is 110 nautical miles. So very small systems that develop eye walls can be prone to having them fluctuate pretty often.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
This is Force 13 Live. We continue to watch Hurricane Dorian slowly progressing towards the northwest. You can see the Bahamas on the left-hand side of the image. Most of those islands will be spared the storm completely. The northernmost of the Bahamas will get some severe weather. Especially the northernmost two islands, which could get the full force of Hurricane Dorian as it reaches Category 4 status, if it does as predicted from the National Hurricane Center. A reminder that no warnings are in effect at this time, but the chances of storm conditions are increasing. It is still a threat that we're looking at, not right now, but it will reach the Bahamas Sunday morning by the looks of things, and then on to Florida by Monday. Still, the timing could change from there as well, because as you can see late on in that National Hurricane Center forecast graphic, the storm slows down. Now, some of that might be uncertainty, or it might just be the fact that the storm actually is slowing down and stalling by that point in its track. And if that does happen, then the rainfall totals will skyrocket. Already, we're looking at potentially 20 inches of rain to fall over parts of central Florida from this storm. So it's not just the winds that will be a big threat, as the models are really projecting that the storm absolutely blows up in moisture, sort of when it reaches the northern Bahamas on day 3.
Yeah. And just something I don't think we've mentioned in particular too much is that this is going to be an absolute mayhem situation for travelers, because this is happening Labor Day weekend in America, one of the busiest travel weekends of the summer, and lots of people like to go to Florida, especially because Disney World is there. There's going to be
Disney World's going to be closed, I think.
Potentially, that is a high probability, but no, they might try to squeeze out some extra time during the weekend. Because now it looks like the storm's approaching at a bit more of a slower pace, not really making landfall till late Monday into early Tuesday, when we were looking at it yesterday, potentially being halfway over Florida by midday to late Monday. So they might try to squeeze out Sunday, see what happens there.
I don't think they will.
You never know, but regardless of that, people should avoid
2 p.m.
travel.
Sunday, it's a major hurricane 150 miles off the coast of Florida.
Oh, God. You might be right there.
Saturday, maybe.
Yeah, but regardless, traveling to Florida is not advised this weekend.
No.
It's not just because there's already going to be a ton of people there and there's going to be a potential major hurricane landfall, but because major metro areas down there are going to already be under extreme stress because of this system. All hands will definitely be on deck. And if you are traveling down there, make sure to have plans in place on how to leave early if necessary, or safe spaces to stay in a worst case scenario. Because this isn't a storm that's just impacting particular Florida. If you look at
I think we've lost Strat just now. Strat was in full flow.
lost.
Strat, you there?
Yes.
We've got you back. You'll have to start that sentence again.
Alright,
Nope, he's going again. Okay, well, we'll have to come back to Strat at some point. Just to remind you what the National Hurricane Center is saying on their forecast advisory, or on their public advisory right now. They have the storm at 85 mile an hour winds. Its position 22.5 north, 67.7 west, moving at 13 miles per hour. Pressure is 986 millibars. Interests in the northwestern and central Bahamas should monitor the progress of Dorian. Watches may be required for portions of this area on Friday. And just rainfall expectations as well. The central Bahamas 1 to 2 inches, isolated up to 4. The northwestern Bahamas 3 to 5 inches, isolated amounts of 7. Coastal sections of the southeastern United States 5 to 10 inches possible, with up to 15 isolated, and that rainfall could cause life-threatening flash floods. They're not saying anything about storm surge yet at this point. They probably will start talking about that more tomorrow.
Yeah. And, speaking of storm surge, I got my connection back. I'm sorry about that. College Wi-Fi is absolutely horrendous. But mentioned earlier, but because, there's always a stream of new people coming back and forth into the stream. The angle of this storm, Dorian, coming into Florida, is quite peculiar to the point where its motion westward and the rotation of cyclones going counterclockwise can mean low-lying areas on the central east coast of the Florida Peninsula could be experiencing high levels of storm surge that they seldom see in numerous decades.
By the way, Strat, I think there's someone you know in the comments section. You might want to go take a look.
Yes, I know. My sister's in the chat. You don't need to remind me.
Okay, well, that's going great. I'll leave you two to it. Orlando, did you want to say something? I just saw that you were there and you looked ready to talk, so...
Yeah, I was going to say something, but it completely slipped my mind at this moment. Hopefully I'll regather that thought.
All right, then. Ryan, did you have something just now?
No.
Oh. Well, I thought you were going to speak as well, funny enough. Okay, well, we're now looking at the satellite imagery of Dorian once again, the latest infrared imagery. This is fantastic. This is completely up to date. Well, not as much as it was earlier. At one point, this imagery we were looking at was less than a minute old. The imagery that we're looking at right now is about 4 minutes old, so we're still not doing too badly. And what you can see again, that northwestern side, there is still a significant dry slot there by the looks of things. I think I'd be right in saying that it is one. Convection blowing up around it, but still, I don't think we can get away from the fact that it is still being hamstrung by dry air intrusion or dry air in the vicinity. Whether the actual central core of the eye is devoid of the dry air now, that might be the case, and then we might see some more intensification, but there is still plenty of it in the vicinity. If you've got any more questions or comments for us whilst we're on the air, send us a message. I think we're going to be finishing up at the end of this hour and doing a standard tropical weather bulletin on the Force 13 channel, so that's a great reason to subscribe because we'll have plenty more updates throughout this evening. I just don't think it's really necessary for us to stay on the air for 6 hours like we did yesterday because the land threat isn't really there yet. It is still very far away from land, but we have discussed at length the potential threats from this storm.
Do you believe that there could be a reason to stay on the air if, for some reason, we see a change in any kind of change in Dorian, like significant change?
Well,
I'm not sure. I mean, recon will be in and around the storm. The National Hurricane Center aren't going to do another update until 11 p.m., so I think we should all just sit back and watch until that hour comes.
Wait, have all the watches and warnings been canceled?
That was yesterday.
There's nothing.
Yeah, there are currently no watches and warnings in effect for Dorian.
Oh, I mean, yeah, it is pretty far from land, but of course, within the next few days, we'll start to get some of those watches and warnings.
No doubt tomorrow night we'll probably be running 24-hour coverage, knowing our luck. We will end up doing that at some point, so it pays to stick around.
It's true, that's very true.
As early as tomorrow.
It's just something that, regardless of no direct warnings of cyclone-related being in effect right now, tropical storm watches, warnings, storm surges, life-threatening rip currents and waves are definitely impacting land right now. Turks and Caicos, Bahamas, Virgin Islands, Hispaniola, and Puerto Rico are all facing those kind of adversities right now. A storm doesn't need to be impacting land directly to cause loss of life. An example of that, last year's Hurricane Chris, which did not deliver any tropical storm force winds to any part of mainland America, but rip currents did actually claim a few lives. So you see the forecast track graphic up there. Winds a solid few hundred miles away from any landmass, but waves and rip currents generated from a storm, especially once it gets more intense, can precede any what you would assume to be normal impacts by numerous days. And the other thing I was saying before, my connection kind of dropped out earlier, in terms of rainfall and where in the state there might be impacts, is that the models are trending more towards that kind of stalling and moving north through the state. This could be a multi-day severe rainfall event if things go very badly, or lots of Florida, where it starts further south and kind of drags its way north through the rest of the state. There's huge population centers on most of the state: Jacksonville, Fort Lauderdale, Miami, Tampa Bay, Naples, even down further south into the Keys and all the way up through the state. Orlando, there's lots of cities that can't go over fully. There's a lot of places that if this kind of slows down a bit now, like the Chiefs and other models are trying to depict, we could see lots of rainfall be wrung out over the state through numerous days, even more so than just the initial storm surge from a storm that's been generating waves and intensity for multiple days, and the landfall angle and high winds at the landfall area. So watching this very closely to see how the track forecast holds up from what we were formerly expecting yesterday to be potentially Gulf of Mexico move to now a curl up into the rest of the state is going to be vital for the near future.
Indeed.
Yeah.
Just been looking at some other things right now.
It seems as though everything at this point with Dorian is really terrifying, at least because I still have family that live in the Florida region. And beyond that, though, is the amounts of consensus within the models that's already been highlighted on multiple occasions so far when it comes to not only just the intensity, but the tracks and the potential for heavy rainfall, especially in an area like Florida, for instance. It's just overall pretty scary, and I'm not surprised that the local government is already taking actions early on.
So let's get on to our final thoughts and predictions, really. How much do we think this storm might intensify overnight tonight?
It's really hard to say.
It sure is. But we are... we've got a lot of experience of tracking these storms, and maybe we can give some indicators.
From my experience, it's wholly dependent on how this dry air slot filters through. You see convection right now bubbling up not only to the southwards trying to break in, but around it to try to choke it out right now. If you look at the water vapor imagery that you have there right now, if that happens successfully and that dry air gets crushed out, because this isn't low-level dry air, this is mid-level dry air if you look at soundings. If you can get rid of that, we could see a Category 3 potentially by 18 hours from now, or by the time we're live streaming tomorrow night. If that doesn't happen, we could be seeing only very slight intensification. It's wholly dependent, really, on how that dry air works out, because other than that, it's in pretty favorable conditions.
This is just a hunch on my part, but I think that the dry air is now excluded from the central core of the eye by the looks of things. It's a bit of a guess, but it might be the case that the eye wall is finished keeping out that dry air, at least from the central one. Now, whether the eye wall is going to struggle and collapse again, whether we might have another eye wall replacement cycle, that still remains to be seen at this point.
I mean, what we could see tomorrow could range from the exact same intensity we're seeing right now if this dry air becomes even more of a problem and it causes the concentric eye walls to collapse. Or we could see it get fully squashed out because it looks like where it's trying to feed into the center of the storm, convection is strengthening, which could indicate a secure eye wall, and that eye wall continues to develop overnight. You're also seeing the later frames more convection over the very center of the storm. If everything goes in favor of the storm, we could see Category 3 tomorrow by the time we're streaming, like I said, or we could see something in a very similar situation right now.
Yes, I think it could also be Category 2. It starts tomorrow.
There's a wide range of possibilities.
I think it's going to be Category 2. I think it's going to be Category 2 by tomorrow morning, but not sure about Category 3 at this point.
Yeah,
I'm thinking it's close enough to Category 2 status, but I don't think it's Category 3.
I think it could become a high Category 2, though, like close to Category 3 by the time we start streaming, but I don't think it's going to correct that Category 3 thing until at least we're streaming tomorrow.
Yeah, I'm thinking that probably around this time tomorrow it will probably be a major. That's my prediction.
Maybe. And just for reference, we most likely will be doing our live streaming around the same time tomorrow as we started tonight and yesterday night, about 5 p.m. Eastern time, and we'll take you all the way through the evening, I should imagine, assuming the watches have been put into effect. I'm sure we'll have a lot more to talk about. But for the time being, I think we're going to finish up here at this point, and Tropical Weather Bulletin will be coming up as normal in just over an hour's time, and then maybe the team will be back with maybe some more coverage late tonight if they want to do it on their own, or maybe some more storm updates. But in the meantime, Dorian is still around 4 days away from striking Florida, a little bit less than that for the Bahamas. We are still watching it very closely. The threat is not decreasing, it is very much increasing at this point. And for the first time I think I've ever seen, all the models are in agreement 4 days in advance before striking Florida. Irma couldn't get that. That was about 3 days in advance. For Andrew's landfall, the models only agreed on a Florida landfall on a completely 24 hours before it actually happened. I think I find that quite crazy, even though the models weren't as good back then. I still think that's crazy. But there we are. That is Hurricane Dorian, probably intensifying at this point. Recon Planes will investigate tonight, and we'll have more updates on the Force 13 channel and on our social media outlets. Search Force 13 on Facebook and Twitter to get in touch with us on there as well. And you can join our Discord community server. The link is in our description. Any last words from our team?
Just keep a close eye on this, make sure that you're safe, and yeah, you'll be fine.
Yes. If any of you who live in Florida or the Bahamas, Georgia, or any other southeastern states bordering Florida, I would continue to monitor this system very closely as despite the tracks having a better consensus of where the storm is going, the tracks are still going to remain uncertain, and we have seen very crazy
Florida's a big
outcomes
place.
We've seen a lot of crazy outcomes with storms in recent memory.
Yeah. And
if you
losing the signal there.
Yeah. I just like to remind anyone that's in harm's way of the storm potentially, not only to keep up to date with us and the information we're providing, but to listen to the National Hurricane Center and local officials that are giving you any instructions or information regarding your specific area. They're probably going to be able to provide more accurate information about your exact location than we can. We're providing more broad coverage on towns and regions. Our U.S. channel might be able to provide more updates that are more localized later on as we get closer to land as the long weekend begins. But for local officials, listen to them. If they give you evacuation orders, if they're voluntary, consider them strongly. If they're involuntary, do them. If you're in a low-lying area, listen to where you can get sandbags and other supplies to protect your home or place of residence. And for people that are here watching us and plan to continue doing so, make sure to leave likes, subscribe to the channel, share a couple links around, and we have everything else in the description as well if you guys want to check out everything else. And thank you so much for watching tonight.
That was a speech. You would think that Strat was the host. Have a great night. We'll see you again tomorrow, our next live event, that is, and with more updates throughout the night. Good night.